Amen. Well, thank you so much. What a joy to be home in our home church and see everybody's lovely faces and to be able to continue this amazing subject, this amazing theme that you've got, lifting Jesus high, and to bring what is, in my view, one of the most challenging passages in the whole of the Gospels, actually, on this subject. And I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to grips with it and seeing what Jesus was actually saying, because I'm sure that all of us by now in this theme of lifting Jesus high have realised that lifting Jesus high isn't about singing nice loud songs and clapping and writing the name of Jesus on a t-shirt or waving a flag. It actually means something much more powerful and much more profound than that. And I think this passage, of all of the passages, kind of sums up something of that more than any other that I've read. And in fact, when I was a Christian many years ago, nearly 40 years ago now, flip me, you think I am that old now. I read this for the first time, and to be perfectly truthful, this passage really scares me. I thought, oh my goodness, lose your life? Who would do that? Who would want to lose their life? And who would want to take up their cross? And it felt to me utterly unattainable and completely, to be honest, a bit unreasonable of Jesus to be saying these things. But now, in the light of what I've come to see as what the life of Jesus actually means for us, I've come to actually really love this passage because it cuts to the very heart of what the gospel is. I've just realised my reading glasses actually match my dress. That is amazing. That was more by accident than design, I can promise you. But first of all, I want to put in context this passage, in terms of the rest of the chapter, what Jesus has been doing before he makes this statement, because he's not making this statement in isolation. He's making it on the back of recent experiences. And the two miracles that he's just done that Mark tells us about are the feeding of the big crowd, bread and fish, the 4,000 people, where he multiplied all the bread and the fish. And then he restored sight to a blind man, first who could see fuzzily and then could see clearly. And these miracles, both of them, revealed something really important that are connected to the statement that we are looking at today. Jesus described himself in John as the bread of life. He is the life. He's the real life that we step into and take up. And he is the real life. But he says, beware of the false bread. Beware of the false life, if you like. And he says to the disciples that witnessed that amazing miracle of multiplying the bread and the fish, he said something a bit strange. He said, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod. And I always used to be a little bit confused by that. What is he talking about? Well, the yeast of the Pharisees, it represents basically religion and rules and obligations that just put heavy burdens on our shoulders that we can never, ever hope to achieve. And, some people think that's what Christianity is. For them, they just look at Christianity and they see a bunch of rules, dead religion, and something you can never live up to, and just is going to multiply your shame. And that's how they see it. But Jesus said, beware that kind of bread, because it's not the real thing. And he also said, beware the yeast of Herod. And if there was ever a beware we need to take hold of in these days that we're living in now, it's the yeast of Herod, because Herod represents human power and force and selfishness and ego and politicking. And oh my goodness me, we don't have to look very far to see leaders around the world strutting in the yeast of Herod. And it's all about ego, it's all about force and power and manipulation and human power. And Jesus says, beware of that kind of bread, because that is going to kill you. It's not the real thing. And you'll see in a minute why I'm saying these things as a run-up to this passage that we're going to look at today. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. I am the life. I am the bread of life. And he's got beautiful, fragrant, sustaining bread to feed us with today. He's got beautiful, fragrant, sustaining bread to feed us with as we go into this coming week and as we go into the coming days. And it doesn't taste of impossible rules, unreasonable demands. It doesn't taste of human power or manipulation or self-seeking politics that can so often happen around us in any community. We see it happening. And Jesus says, just beware of it, because that's not me. That's not the real bread. So let's look back at the passage again. So if we can have that passage back up again, starting with verse 29 there. So let's flip on to verse 29. There we are. Peter has just declared, and brownie points for Peter. Jesus said, who do you say I am? And right answer, Peter. Well done. Ding. He's got the right answer. But Peter had clearly not understood just how God's Messiah was going to operate, because he might have got a brownie point in verse 29, but come verse 31, he gets it spectacularly wrong. He hears what Jesus begins to say. He begins to speak clearly, crystal clear actually, about what's going to happen to him and how God is going to bring this amazing ancient design of salvation to God's people. He begins to preach with really, not in stories, absolutely clear, just like the man, the blind man who can suddenly see with clarity. Jesus is beginning to teach with clarity what is about to happen to him. But Peter is absolutely appalled by this. Jesus, what are you saying? You're going to be rejected? You're going to be put to death? Just how can that be any good idea? How can that be God's way of bringing light to the world? How can that be? Surely we need to hold on to our influence. We need to use as much power and force to bring good into the world. We need to use as much force to do that as possible. Not let go of your power, not let go of your influence. Surely that can't be right. And you know where it says he rebuked Jesus? These were Jewish people, and there's lots of passions in Mediterranean culture, isn't there? And I'm sure that there was a massive row, actually. Mark should have put massive row, because rebuke seems rather a sort of sensible word. But believe me, I think when we were there, it was not very polite. But then Jesus cuts through and he shuts Peter down with this key verse this morning. And if we remember nothing else of our time looking at this passage this morning, this is a verse that I want us to see. Verse 33 there. Jesus turns around to Peter and he says this. He says, you do not have in mind the concerns of God. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, merely human concerns. What a challenge. What a challenge. You do not have the concerns of God, merely human concerns. Oh my goodness, to have the heart and the concerns of God himself. Isn't that our prayer? Isn't that our longing? When we first thought of this theme of lifting Jesus high, isn't that our prayer? More than anything else, we want to see Jesus lifted high in our families, in this community. And God hears that prayer. I believe with all my heart, he sees that prayer. He sees that longing that we want to see Jesus lifted high. And what we're being invited into in this season, this morning, is to receive the very heart and concerns of God. Isn't that an amazing thing? Wouldn't it be amazing if when we look around us, we feel God's heartbeat? we feel God's concerns. And what God is inviting us into this morning, and it is reflected in this passage, to lay down and put to death everything that stops that happening, that stops us stepping in and entering into God's values, God's heart, the things that really matter, not the human concerns that really, really don't matter and that just bring destruction, but the true riches, the things that really are valuable, the pure love and the heart of God himself. Lord, let that be our hunger and our prayer today, that we receive and step in the concerns of God. And I think when Jesus had this little altercation, shall we say, with Peter, he probably realized that if Peter had missed it so spectacularly, he was so way off in his perspective of how Jesus was going to actually bring this plan of salvation to the universe. I think Jesus probably thought, I wonder if everybody else has missed this as well. So what Jesus does then, he calls everybody together. He brings the crowd together, and he then makes this extraordinary statement that used to scare me witless when I was first reading this as a 19-year-old. For me, it sums up the whole of the gospel and how we follow Jesus. Verse 34, let's have a look at verse 34 there. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. And whoever wants to save their life, that word life is also translated soul. It's the same word that's translated both life and soul in verses 36 and 37. So bear that in mind. Anyone who wants to save their life or soul will lose it. But whoever loses their life or soul, for me, for the gospel, will save it. And what Jesus is actually saying here is that there are two types of life. There's two types of life that we can live. One will kill us, and one will bring us immense riches in real terms, in true terms. One is pure and fragrant, and one stinks of human concerns, manipulation, power, and human rules that are impossible. The false life is selfish, it's superficial, and it's concerned with power and looking better than the person next to me. It's concerned with ego and everything's appearances. If it looks okay on the surface, then we'll be fine. We can tell as many lies as we like. As long as we get away with it, it doesn't matter. And Jesus says that sort of life will kill you. But more than that, it actually robs you of true life. It actually robs you of your true soul, your true identity that God has created for you to live. It robs you and it will kill you. But the true life that he says we will gain if we lose the other one will bring real fullness, real deep treasure and fruitfulness. And it will lift up Jesus amongst us in the lives of everybody around us. And Jesus says, whatever it takes, whatever we need to do, whatever holds us back from leaving behind this false life, from laying it down, this false identity, that is the cross that we're going to pick up. That is the cross we're going to nail it to. And whatever it takes, nothing is going to stop us from receiving that true life that Jesus is calling us to. And follow the life. Not Christianity, not those rules, not those tick boxes that if we pray more and try more and put on more programs and turn up on time and all those other things that sometimes we can substitute for the real life. Not the trellis, but the plant. He is alive. He is not a set of rules or a concept any more than love is a concept. Love can be experienced and lived, and Jesus is real and he's a living person. So we have this false life, this false identity, and we have the true life, and we have both of them before us, and we have a choice to make. one false soul, one false identity, one true soul, one true identity that God has called us and created us to live in. You know, with this bread, it can be infused with the poison of the yeast of religion and manipulative power. We see too much of it, don't we? But one that's fragrant, and it's got the Spirit of God to nourish us and to feed us with. But here's the challenge. Unfortunately, we can't hold both loaves at the same time. We've got to put one down before we pick the other up. We can't balance. And one day we have one loaf, we eat from one loaf, and one day we eat from the other, because he says a little yeast works through the whole batch of dough, and one little bit of false life will ruin your entire life. So you have to put that one down, pick up your cross, nail it to the cross completely. Let the Lord take it away in order for you to feed on what's really real and what's really brings life. And verse 36 says something about this life, this beautiful bread. It's more valuable than all of the wealth of the whole world put together. It's more valuable than the whole world. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? It's the same word that Jesus talks about losing your life. This is the same Greek word, yet forfeit their soul. What can anyone give in exchange for their soul? This is so precious, so valuable. Just imagine if you forfeited this bread of life for a bread of a Pharisee yeast that says, well, I'm sorry, but God is a little bit disappointed in you today. You're going to have to try harder than that. You're going to have to pray a bit longer, and you're going to have to pay for that mistake that you made. And all of those regrets, well, they're always going to be there in your pocket, I'm afraid. You're never quite going to make the grade. You're always going to have that little sense of guilt because you're not really a very good Christian, are you? It's a yeast that feeds on despair and shame. And it's the yeast that our son-in-law AJ was being fed by other Christians around him. And it took Nigel to tell him about the true judge who stands up in court, the advocate, Jesus, who says, excuse me, judge, I've actually paid for all of that. This man can go free. And to understand that freedom truly means freedom when Jesus declares it. We don't need to eat a yeast that feeds on despair and shame. We don't have to be in with the in crowd and adjust your character to fit with everybody else. You can be truly your true identity. You don't have to eat the Herod bread that has to say, yes, sir, no, sir, to whatever leader or political leader is spouting his manipulation. We don't have to live under ego or jealousy. You know, that's a beautiful thing about this life. We never have to be jealous of anybody else. Even if they occupy a similar space to us, we can champion them because they're our brother and our sister. We get double the joy, and we can cheer one another on. We never have to be jealous of someone else because our ego has gone. And we can celebrate the person that God has made, who is our brother and sister. So let's taste the bread of life, Jesus says. And you know something? When you receive this life and you put to death, you deny this false life and you receive this true life, it kind of ruins you. It kind of ruins you for any other kind of life. Once you've tasted the power and the beauty and the purity of the life that Jesus offers, it totally ruins you for something else. You know, if Liz had tried that champagne on the train, you know, she probably wouldn't have wanted the cheap plonk when she got home that was, you know, $3.50 from the supermarket. You know, once you taste the best, you can't go back. You kind of can't ever go back, which is why it's been put on the cross. Jesus says, you've taken up the cross. You cannot ever go back once you've tasted and received the true concerns of God, the true compassion of God. And his concerns, not human concerns, the petty power struggles and the worries of this false life. But, and I'm sure you noticed in those verses, there's a pretty big cost, isn't there, to this? There is a cost attached. You have to leave this false life behind. I'm saying this over and over again because I'm preaching to my own heart as well as everybody else. What happens? What would happen? Just suppose we said to God this morning, Lord, will you come and will you give us your concerns? Will you give us your true heart? Will you give us the heart that bleeds and the heart that sees your world the way you see the world? And I'm just looking around this morning, actually, and I can see people who prayed that prayer and their lives are different because of it. I'm seeing Stuart sitting over there. He didn't one day think, I know, it's a good career move to become a Baptist minister. You only have to work 1 day a week and you get a good house out of it and the pay's pretty good. I don't think that was ever in his mind when he decided to follow Jesus in that way. He had the concerns of God. He had the heart of God that bleeds for the world that he sees. And he knew that this message of the bread of life would change lives. And their lives have borne that out ever since. I see Sylvia, who's worked overseas. She didn't think, it's a good way to see the world. Good way of getting a free trip abroad. God gave her the heart of God in order to serve. And there are so many other people in this room. Liz, who led our prayers, she's not served the people of Brighton through Brighton City Mission because she was a bit bored and thought, I've got to fill the time somehow. I might as well do that. No, God gave her his heart for the people of Brighton. And she obeyed his heart. So I just wonder this morning what would happen if more and more and more in our lives daily we began to say, Lord, give us the concerns of God. Peter was looking at the world through a human perspective, through political power to overthrow the oppressive government. But Jesus said, you are not looking at it the way I look at it. I want you to step into my heart and my concerns. And there is a cost to that. And I want to tell you a little story now about a lady back in the 18th century. Here's her face. Karen's got, I'm afraid it's a really rubbish picture. It was the best one I could find. This is an amazing woman. There we are. Yes. She tasted the bread of life. She tasted the reality and the truth of what Jesus could do. Her name was Rebecca Freundlich-Protten. And she was born into slavery, actually, in Antigua in the year 1718. She is known as the mother of the modern missionary movement. And she's an incredible, incredible woman with an amazing story. At the age of 7, she was kidnapped from her family. And she was sold into slavery in what's now the British Virgin Islands. But it was there that she met some people from Germany, from a place called Herrnhut in Germany, who told her about Jesus, who introduced her to Jesus. And after hearing about Jesus, she received the Spirit of God, and it says she was so filled with love and fire, historians tell us, that she preached to hundreds of other slaves on the island. And so much so, she was seen as a threat, and she was imprisoned for a time. And when she was released, she was sent to Germany, actually, to Herrnhut, the community there in Germany, where she continued her ministry and carried on with her teaching and preaching. She eventually went back to Africa. She got back to Africa, and she died in what's now Ghana. where she led many, many, many female slaves to Christ, and she discipled them and she taught them to read. Now, I don't know if you can see Rebecca's face, but she looks like a kind of fun person, doesn't she? Can you see her smile? You know, when a few years ago, me and Nige went to Herrnhut in Germany to do a worship event. There's still a community there. Now, in Herrnhut, there was a great move of God, which was known as the Moravians. They sent missionaries all over the world, and they were a pretty amazing and radical group. And seeing all of the portraits, the 18th century portraits of all of the missionaries, they were all smiling. They're all twinkling away, like Rebecca's kind of twinkling away with a real light in her eyes. And it was really unusual to see, because normally 18th century portraits, people are very solemn, and it's always very colourless and very solemn. But these portraits were amazing. They were just filled with life. But you know, the most remarkable thing in Rebecca's story isn't Rebecca herself. But the most remarkable thing in the story is that the missionaries who told Rebecca about Jesus had come from Germany, but they had actually sold themselves into slavery in order to be able to preach to the enslaved. Isn't that incredible? They had so tasted of the riches and the preciousness of the bread of life, of the true life, that they were prepared to forfeit their earthly freedoms in order to share this truth and this life with others. And because of that, people like Rebecca found life for themselves and passed it on. They were so motivated by the love and concerns of God, and they were so filled with his fire, they exchanged those earthly freedoms in order to share it. And do you know what? Here's the challenge. We have got that same sort of choice today. We can deny this life, this half-life. It's a half-life of selfishness, chewing on religion, appearances, trying to get wealth, to try and fill those holes, and to follow after the real thing, to really see Jesus lifted high. This is how Jesus will be lifted high among us. This is our theme. We want to see Jesus lifted high. And the way we're going to see Jesus lifted high is to forfeit this false life of religion and power politics, and to step in to the true life. Because once we've tasted that, our lives will never be the same again. So how much are we concerned? And I'm speaking to my own heart. How much am I motivated by the concerns of God in my daily life? Having his heart, his compassion. But here's some good news. Only Jesus can give us his heart. Only Jesus, only the Father can give us the heart of Jesus through his Spirit. We can't work it up. We can't guilt trip ourselves into it. Only God can do that through his Spirit. And he does say, here is the bread. Come and eat. And I will give you my concerns. I will give you my heart. But here's a little rider. Here's a little warning. If you taste of it, the true bread, your life will never be the same again. Because you will weep with me. You will weep with those who are weeping. And you will walk through the darkness. You won't be afraid of the darkness, because even the darkness is light to him. But you will go into those dark places, because that's where the light needs to shine. You will weep in the night. You will have sleepless nights. You know, you will pray like Anne's been praying this week for those who are hurting. We won't be able to turn our backs anymore and pretend we haven't heard about the pain and suffering in the world. We will bear that pain, and yet, we will be able to hold the love and light of Jesus, just like Rebecca did. Rebecca's life was desperately hard. She lost 2 children in infancy. She was enslaved. She was imprisoned. Her life was not a walk in the park. She did not have it easy. But you see the joy and the life in her face. This is what Jesus is offering us today. Only He knows what we need to lay down. He knows us so well, and it may be a lifetime's journey, but the invitation is there.